Can you hear me? I'm not sure whether that's an advantage or not. Okay, I'll just get started. With my fingers crossed that I've got all the pages. The paper is entitled William Chalmers on Radical Evil. William Chalmers brackets Gulielmus Camerarius Scotus, because that's the name he wrote under. So here's my first section, which is entitled, Who was William Chalmers? I've spent the past 30 or 40 years wandering around collecting Scottish philosophers. Some of my former colleagues thought I invented them, but you don't need to invent Scottish philosophers. There are so many anyway. If anything, one might say that they invent themselves. So who was William Chalmers? Here we go. During the 17th century, Scots were religiously, philosophically, and theologically active in France on both sides of the dividing line that separated the Roman Catholic community from what in Britain we call the Huguenots. I apologize, I'm going to continue to use this barbarous pronunciation, from the Huguenots. As regards the latter community, the Huguenots, Scots played a major role in the life of the Huguenot academies, which were founded largely on the basis of Genevan models to prepare young men for the role of pastors in the Reformed Church in France. On the other side of the religious divide, some Scottish Catholics, responding to the hostility displayed to them by the Scottish Reformed Church, travelled to France, where they undertook formation for the priesthood and, in many cases, vowed to return thereafter to Scotland to minister to their co-religionists, if and when the risk in returning was thought not to be excessive. Among this latter group is a philosopher-theologian, William Chalmers. The dates that are usually given for him are 1596 to 1678. I recommend you carry the latter title lightly. 1678, who wrote under the name Gulielmus Camerarius Scotus. He has long since sunk into oblivion, and during the past several centuries has been the subject of just one sustained examination, which was, however, an investigation published in 1968 concerning a passage just a few pages long taken from one of his writings. I shall illustrate Chalmers' work by considering a question that he penned that sits on the borderline between moral philosophy and moral theology. The question concerns the possibility of performing an act which is done because it is judged by the agent to be evil. Such an act would exemplify the concept of radical evil that is invoked in the title of this paper. It is a strange concept, and for many it is also beyond the bounds of belief that any act could exemplify it. Its strangeness is, I think, rather well represented by the vocabulary used by Chalmers and by others working in this field when they speak of the performance of radical evil as an act of friendship. Clearly, this is friendship in a rather technical sense of the term, and more of this later, because I think the terminology actually does make sense if you get yourself into the right mentalité. Chalmers' discussion of the concept of evil for the sake of evil, or evil in virtue of its being evil, malum qua malum, was penned while Chalmers was in exile in France, and his discussion did not take long to reach back to his readership in Scotland, where it duly prompted several responses. It was, for example, criticised by Chalmers' contemporary, the Scottish Reformed philosopher James Dundas, in his Idea Philosophiae Moralis of 1679. And Dundas's was just one among a number of responses by his fellow Scottish philosophers. This is a small corner of a large story yet to be told concerning the lively interest that Reformed Orthodox Scottish thinkers maintained in Catholic scholasticism. First, however, a few words on the man William Chalmers. This is about 2/3 of a page, so just bear with it. The post-Reformation period was an uncomfortable time for the Scottish Catholic community, and William Chalmers, member of a Catholic family living in Aberdeenshire, reports that he fled from Scotland as a youth in order to avoid having to subscribe to what he called the Calvinist heresy. He is cited next as a student at the Scots College in Rome, where he joined the novitiate of the Society of Jesus. And thereafter, he attended the Jesuit-run colleges at Pont-à-Mousson and at Douai, both of which housed a contingent of Scottish students. In January 1627, he joined a congregation of Oratorians founded about 2 decades earlier by Pierre de Bérulle, who may well have been personally responsible for Chalmers' decision to join. Between 1630 and 1647, he published at least 10 works. The philosophical thrust of his oeuvre is unequivocally in the direction of Scotism, and it was probably the uncompromisingly Scotistic nature of Chalmers' thinking that led to his departure from the Society of Jesus. It is unclear, however, whether he left the Society by choice. Chalmers was an Oratorian for about 8 years, spending time at Vaison, next at Angers, where he was a professor of philosophy, and then Saumur, where he engaged in a dispute with the Jesuit theologians François Anna and Théophile Reynaud on matters relating to the will. But sometime in the mid-1630s, he seems to have left Saumur for Saint-Malo, where he settled down as a secular priest engaged in pastoral duties. He gradually disappears from sight, and the claim commonly made that he died in 1678 seems, at least to me, not to be well attested. In 1643, he published a short book on the history of the Catholic Church in Scotland. It lists the many benefits that the Catholic Church brought to Scotland and that Scottish Catholics brought reciprocally to other countries, such as monasteries that were founded on the continent by Scots. Chalmers expresses support for the Episcopalian as against the Presbyterian form of ecclesiastical governance, and ends with the wish that Scotland, Catholic until the time of Mary Stuart, would revert to the old order. For, as he states, I quote him, "From the time when the new order was established, the fate of the Scottish Catholics oppressed by an extraordinary bondage has been well enough known to everyone. These, that's the end of the quote, these are not the words of a man whose years of exile erased his passion for his native country. So I come to my next section. Could the will evil, qua evil? Chalmers' first and greatest book is Selectae Disputationes Philosophicae. The full title of the book in English, my translation of his Latin title, is Selected Philosophical Disputations, arranged in 3 parts by William Chalmers the Scot, a priest in the congregation of the Oratory of the Lord Jesus, unquote. The 3 parts of the book cover, respectively, logic and moral philosophy, natural philosophy, and metaphysics. At the end of the first part, there is a compact set of 4 questions under the general title Selectae Disputationes Morales, Selected Moral Disputations. The questions are, first, in what does supernatural happiness consist? Secondly, can the will evil, qua evil? Thirdly, in what does evil, or the formal concept of sin, consist? And fourthly, in what does liberty consist? The first 2 questions cover the best and the worst. On the one side, beatitude or happiness, and on the other side, an evil act performed for evil's sake. The third question probes the concept of evil or sin, which is the central concept in the second question, and the final question deals with liberty, for any act falling under the concept of moral good or evil is the exercise of a free will. The paper that I am presenting now, which is on the second of the 4 questions, that concerning evil qua evil, is part of a wider study that I am preparing on Chalmers' moral philosophy. Chalmers sets up a substantial philosophical narrative that he needs to have in place in order to deal with the specific question of evil qua evil, and perforce the greater part of this paper is taken up with those preliminary matters. At this point, the paper starts. An possit voluntas velle malum qua malum may be rendered as, could an evil will qua evil, or could it will evil under the concept of evil, or could it will evil under the description of evil? These latter 2 translations are sanctioned by Chalmers' use of the phrase malum sub ratione mali, evil under the concept or under the description of evil, which he uses as an alternative way of saying malum qua malum. As just noted, the connection between this question and the preceding one is that they deal with topics at opposite ends of a moral spectrum. We have first a question about the best possible human act, namely love of God, and then a question about the worst possible, that is to say, not merely doing evil, but doing it ex malitia, because it is evil. Our question concerning evil qua evil does not deal with the motive of passion in the sensory appetite, nor does it invoke intellectual error as an explanation of the evil act, and in particular, it does not concern whether the agent mistakenly saw the projected act as falling under the concept of good. Let us therefore suppose that the agent is in the grip neither of a passion nor of an error, and especially we suppose that he is not seeing the projected act as a genuine or even as an apparent good. With this in mind, we note Chalmers' observation that there are 3 answers to the question of the possibility of doing evil qua evil. The first answer is simply yes. The second answer is simply no. And in fact, we shall see Chalmers rejects both of these answers. The answer he thinks is yes and no, by virtue of his deployment of a distinction between different sorts of will. Why should we accept the first answer, that it is possible to do evil qua evil? Chalmers' opening move is simply to present an argument from authority, namely that an act of evil qua evil must be possible, since Gregory of Rimini, William Ockham, Gabriel Biel, and, according to some commentators, don't listen to them, John Duns Scotus, say that it is. I am reminded of Aquinas' judgment that the argument from authority is the weakest of all arguments. Chalmers does not at this point say what might have prompted these thinkers to give this first answer, if they gave it, but I should like to indicate the direction of his thinking. The underlying consideration for him is the doctrine that we are free agents, free in the sense of being open to contraries, by which I mean that in the very moment in which we will what we will, we could have willed something else instead. So the point is not that had things been different, we would, or at least could, have acted differently, but that in the very same circumstances in which we will as we will, we could have performed to will a different act. We might judge an alternative act to be stupid or even crazy. But while such a judgment about the putative act might give us pause, it is not an insurmountable obstacle to any action that contradicts the judgment of intellect, and it may in fact be a readily surmountable obstacle. For even if the agent's intellect judges a proposed line of action to be crazy or mad, and therefore not worthy to be willed, the action might nevertheless be willed, for intellect is not the same thing as will. I need to be careful here. Chalmers believes that the mind is a unity, and that though we ascribe different faculties to the mind, each of these faculties is in reality the same as the mind, for each faculty is the form that the mind takes when the mind engages in the characteristic acts of the faculty. So, though both intellect and will are the same as mind, and therefore are the same as each other, they can still be distinguished because acts of intellect are different in kind from acts of will. Though it is intellect that does the thinking, the reasoning and the judging, these 3 things, thinking, reasoning and judging, we ascribe all of these to the intellect. It is will that does the willing, and will is no slave to intellect. In short, the faculty of will has its own life to lead in the mind of the agent. And though will does in general listen to the proposals of intellect and does in general act in accord with the judgments of intellect, it is not causally bound to obey them. How could it be? If you believe in intellectual determinism, then you do not also believe in free will. If, therefore, you believe in free will, you cannot, consistently with that, believe that an agent's awareness that a proposed act is evil makes it causally impossible for the agent to perform the act. How should the anthropology that accommodates the practical possibility of evil qua evil be refuted? Guided by Pseudo-Dionysius and others, Chalmers offers an argumentative counterweight to the authorities that I evoked earlier. Let me note the doctrine of De Divinis Nominibus by the Neoplatonist Pseudo-Dionysius. He argues both on empirical and on metaphysical grounds that the will is always directed to the good as an end, and that though it is sometimes directed to what appears to it to be an evil, the apparent evil is always willed as an intermediary that has to be brought into being for the sake of securing the good end that is also willed. Sometimes it's not easy to see that this is what is happening, but we must persevere in our observation. As Pseudo-Dionysius puts the point, even anger, which many see as an evil to which no good can be ascribed, shares in the good by virtue of the will's desire to direct and turn apparent evils towards what appears to the will to be good. Strange stuff, by which Pseudo-Dionysius appears to mean that even though anger is commonly a destructive passion and on that basis perceived to be an evil, anger that is itself prompted by the sight of an evil being done can motivate the agent to destroy or at least to ward off the threat posed by what prompted the anger. In such cases, the anger is on the side of the good, to which Pseudo-Dionysius adds these words: the good will be the beginning and the end of everything, even of evil things. For we do even these evil things, for example, acting in anger, because we desire the good, for no one does what he does with a view to what is evil. Hence, what is evil comes into being for the sake of what is good, and not on its own account. Unquote. Chalmers has therefore set up an apparent contradiction, so far as he has presented support for two mutually incompatible propositions. First, that evil qua evil can be willed, and secondly, that it cannot be willed. This, to my eye, is immediately identifiable as a step in the process of medieval dialectic. Two positions, mutually incompatible, and you can argue strongly for both of them. But Chalmers is not satisfied with the binariness of this presentation. He wishes to argue that the two alternatives are neither mutually exclusive nor jointly exhaustive. He thinks that the two positions are in fact mutually compatible, and on that basis he proposes a tertium quid, a principle of reconciliation between the opposed positions. His first step towards this reconciliation consists in making a distinction between two forms that will can take. Namely, will as friendship, velle amicitiae, or voluntas amicitiae, and will as desire, velle concupiscentiae, or voluntas concupiscentiae. to which shall be added, as inseparable from the two forms of will, two forms that love can take, namely lover's friendship, amor amicitiae, and lover's desire, amor concupiscentiae. For charmers, and indeed for most of those who wrote on this topic in the Catholic scholastic tradition, love is inseparable from will, for love is located in the will. We are commanded to love God and to love our neighbour, and failure to obey these commandments is a sin. The Corpus Juris Canonici makes it abundantly clear that if failure to perform a given act is sinful, then the performance of the act in question must be subject to voluntary control. In a word, it is free. Chalmers makes heavy use of the terminology just spelled out, and I must provide a brief account of it. He rests his doctrine upon Aristotelian teaching regarding the relation between the categories of substance and accident. A familiar feature of this relation is that substance stands to accident somewhat as antecedent stands to consequent. Substance, accident, antecedent, consequent. For an accident is not self-standing, but instead presupposes the substance that it qualifies, whereas the substance qualified by the accident is itself self-subsistent, unlike any accident. In that sense, substances are antecedent to the accidents which depend for their existence on the substances in which they inhere. This topic, which was a casus belli at the time of the Reformation in virtue of the role ascribed to real accidents in the miracle of transubstantiation, is central to Chalmers' discussion because he held there to be a relation between love as friendship and love as desire that is precisely parallel to that between substance and accidents. That is, love as desire presupposes love as friendship. Chalmers writes, I quote him, "Love as desire presupposes, as something antecedent to itself, love as friendship, by which something is loved for its own sake before something else is loved in relation to it." End of quote. And shortly thereafter, he adds this, I quote him again, "Love as friendship is directed to a substance, that is, towards an object that is loved for its own sake. Love as desire is directed towards an accident, which is loved not for its own sake." Love as desire is loved not for its own sake, but in relation to something else that is loved for its own sake. Likewise, a love that loves what is useful for the production of what is loved for itself. Can I say that again? Likewise, a love that loves what is useful for the production of what is loved for itself may be classed as accidental, as contrasted with a love that loves what is loved for itself or for its own sake, and is therefore to be classed as a substantive love. You love as substantively when you are loving something for its own sake. You love accidentally when you love something that you only love because it is productive of something else that you love for its own sake. This exposition permits me to set up the main technical terms with which Chalmers works: love as friendship and love as desire, and will as friendship and will as desire. Love, understood as a form that friendship takes, is love of something X for itself. That is, love of some X and for the sake of itself and not for the sake of something beyond X. Love, understood as a form that desire takes, is a love for something considered as a means to something beyond itself. It is in this sense that lover's desire is dependent on love as friendship. In the same way, the act of will is friendship, is a willing of something for the sake of that something and not as a means. And the act of will as desire is a willing of something for the sake of something else. This distinction is at the heart of Chalmers' discussion. Granted that his judgment that the will of friendship can will evil qua evil, and that the will of desire cannot. Chalmers directs our attention to the fact that our love for someone as a friend, that is, our love for them for their own sake and not for our sake, moves us to desire a good for them. And this practical point is the reason why love as friendship is antecedent to love as desire. The fact that Chalmers emphasizes the difference between these two sorts of active will should not surprise us. As a moral theologian, he distinguishes between the moral status of different acts in terms of the inner aspect of the action, and few distinctions in this field are more important than that between the two sorts of love that are center stage in Chalmers' question about evil qua evil. In this area of his philosophy, Chalmers relies heavily upon materials provided by Duns Scotus. As proof of this, let me build on a curious criticism that Scotus makes of St. Augustine. It is an odd little corner in the history of philosophy. Duns Scotus refers us to St. Augustine's claim that if someone declares, "You all wish to be happy and do not wish to be unhappy," unquote, everyone in his audience would have acknowledged this proposition in his faculty of will. And Duns Scotus comments that, I quote him, "This principle, all will happiness, is true in respect of love as desire, and it is false in respect of love as friendship," unquote. On which Chalmers comments as follows: "On this basis, we have it in Scotus's judgment that our will, whatever it wills under the concept of the good, but that this is true as regards desire and not as regards friendship." The rest of this paper is on this judgment and on the concept of friendship as issue. Lover's desire, then, is thought not to raise problems concerning the willing of evil for the sake of evil. There is general agreement that will as desire is founded on natural appetite, by which all things naturally seek their own good and their own survival, and naturally seek to obstruct whatever appears to threaten their good and threaten their survival. And beyond this argument, Chalmers argues on the basis of common experience, according to which it is clear that we apprehend some ground of goodness in all things that we seek for ourselves. This ground, we are reminded, draws us the more strongly the better it is and the better it is apprehended. If this is correct, then it is contrary to nature for us, acting from lover's desire, to will evil for the sake of evil. Our desire always directs us towards the apparent good, even if it also directs us to evil acts as a means of achieving that good. And if this second opinion that I discussed earlier the one attributed to Aristotle, Dionysius, and Aquinas, has the meaning I've just indicated, then Chalmers concurs, as also does Dionysius. Right. I now come to the third and last section, which I have entitled Disordered Minds. We have to proceed on the basis of the proposition that to love something out of love as friendship is to will the good for that thing and to do so for the sake of that thing. That is the crucial clause in this formula. You have to do it as a friend for the sake of that thing, of that friend. You're not treating somebody as a friend if you're doing some good for them for your own sake. A question arises concerning what comes under the heading of good when we say that to love something for the sake of friendship is to will the good for that thing and to do so for the sake of that thing. For example, does happiness count as a good? It surely counts as a good with respect to lover's desire, and surely, as regards what for the moment I shall call normal cases of love as friendship, we have to say that motivated by love as friendship, we will happiness for certain people, and we do so for their sake and not for ours. That is not, I think, a matter for dispute among any of these philosophers. But I now come to the nub of the argument. It is a mistake to suppose that this is how love as friendship must always work. And the error underlying this, that mistaken supposition, that is how love always works. Love as friendship always works. The mistake but made by those who believe that love as friendship will always encompass this doing for the sake of the other and producing happiness thereby, happiness. The error underlying it is the belief that all agents have well-ordered minds. Perhaps because everybody, all of us in this room, we are all nice people. And one of the reasons I would say, to leave my script alone for the moment, why moral philosophy might in certain respects be constraining itself inappropriately, is that we look out upon the world using ourselves as moral models in talking generally about people. And we, of course, are all very nice people, so we look out and generally, and this is how we think. We think about morality for nice people. You shouldn't. You really shouldn't. You and I have got nice, well-ordered minds, but devils and the damned and very perverted wayfarers, all of these categories, familiars of theologians. These beings, devils, the damned and very perverted wayfarers, viatores perversissimi is the phrase that's used by Chalmers. They have disordered minds, animae inordinatae, where inordinatae can also be translated as deranged or even unhinged. But, you know, these deranged or unhinged beings might be human beings too. They're just unhinged human beings. Such disordered beings who know that beatitude is a good, and a good that they themselves will never experience, will that it not be experienced by anyone, and in so willing they will an evil for the sake of evil. what motivates their thought of the what motivates them in willing this evil for the sake of evil is their thought of the evil product. Likewise, an anima inordinata, a disordered mind, can will God's annihilation. Chalmers affirms, there seems no doubt but that the damned could will that there be no God, though from the fact that God does not exist, no goodness or pleasure could come their way. Indeed, what is more, it seems that the will of a very perverted wayfarer could do the same, and could assail God with hate. Two questions might be asked. The first is, how could anyone possibly will such monstrous ends as the annihilation of beatitude and even the annihilation of God? And could will them while knowing them to be evil ends? To which Chalmers' reply is that no one could do such a thing unless deranged, inordinatus. To be deranged is precisely to be able and disposed to will such evils while knowing them to be evil. And to those who say that there surely cannot be such evil beings, Chalmers' reply is, I think, that unless the Bible speaks falsely to us, there are indeed devils and the damned and very perverted wayfarers disposed to perform just such acts. I turn finally to the second of my two questions. What justifies using the phrases the will of friendship and love of friendship in order to speak of devilish acts of will? Wherein lies the friendship? I believe that the overarching point is, as hinted at earlier, that we must not focus on the friendliness ordinarily met with in a person who has civilized values and is free of the spiritual disorderliness or sheer derangement that I have been describing. Instead, we should focus on a pared-down concept of a friendly act or a friendly willing whose first quality is its unselfishness or its altruism, an acting for the other and not an acting for what Immanuel Kant calls the dear self. A devil or damnatus or a very perverse wayfarer does not act for his own sake. He does not seek his own pleasure, nor is in any other way motivated by self-love. And he is not seeking to bestow a benefit on the recipient of his act, nor more generally is he seeking to make the world a better place. His aim, on the contrary, is to bestow a malefice, not a benefit. Nor does the devil, while doing evil, think that he is doing good, for he is not ignorant of what he is doing. Chalmers works with the interesting premise. I quote him, "Let us suppose that some intellect embraces hatred of God and is not in error in that embrace, and hence let us suppose that evil under the concept of evil is displayed towards God and not evil under the concept of some good." Unquote. We are to suppose, therefore, that a devil's hatred of God is not based on a false understanding of God, according to which God is a God of injustice, a God on the side of the oppressor and the destroyer, a God who enjoys making wives widows and enjoys making children orphans. Such error might mark someone out as ignorant on a most epic scale, but it would not mark him out as a devil. Ignorance is not, as such, a form of derangement. Chalmers requires us to accept as a premise the proposition that God knows God to be the God of justice and mercy, who liberates the slave and revives the dead. The true devil is being friendly in a specifically devilish way, in acting out of hatred of God, where that hatred is grounded in a true understanding of God's attributes. The true devil acts for the sake of the other, and not for the sake of himself. And in this friendly spirit, he knowingly does evil to his victim. Let us suppose there to be a devil who has free will, free in the Scottish sense of the term. The devil is, of course, naturally inclined to do evil, just as most of us are naturally inclined to do good. We would do good if our passions were not so obstructive, or if we were not so much in error. Whether the error be because our passions are obstructed by the well-functioning of our reasoning or because of some other cause, the devil would do evil unless he were obstructed by some passion or by error. But I am also supposing that the devil does not have a contrary passion. In particular, the devil is not strangely moved by a passion that lures him into an act of goodness. And I assume that he does not suffer from error. In the situation that I describe, the devil's will is in complete charge, with no obstacle to overcome, and what he wills is evil. What makes the devil a devil is the fact that he wills evil because he is free. He requires no further reason than his very freedom. The devil's evil nature is freely given full rein, and the outcome is an act ex malitia solum, an act performed from pure wickedness and worthy of a devilish celebration of freedom. That is what it is to be a devil, from which it follows that the friendship of a devil is to be avoided at all costs. There is nothing more dangerous. Thank you.